Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after the orphans, the widows in their distress, and keep oneself from being polluted of the world. It is clear from this statement by James that it's not enough just to do religious things. It's not enough just to go to church, to pray, to read the Bible. These activities may produce good outward things, but unless they're producing the inward change that changes how we relate to other people, they're not doing what they're supposed to do. And Jesus also makes very clear again and again, it's not enough just to hear things. We need to be doing the words that he teaches. Most of us have probably encountered someone in our lives who talks much about their religious faith, but their lives exhibit selfishness, greediness, unkind, angry behaviors. And we scratch our head and say, where's the evidence of that faith? This is not talking about earning our salvation, but it is saying that if our love for God is such, it should come out in our expression to others. It should work its way out in what Paul calls the fruit of the Spirit. Ronald Rolheiser talks about that the absolute essence of spirituality is a private morality, a private pietous life, a public concern, and a gentle and meek spirit. These are the essentials of the spirit life. But if we're honest, we have to admit that this is not easy. We struggle with it when it comes to personal choices. Sometimes we have difficulty living as we were designed to live. But we also know that we struggle when it comes to our relationships with other people. We said last week, justice is using our power for the benefit of others, and we often struggle with that. This week, as we enter back into the book of Amos, we want to look at this group of people that we talked about last week wasn't doing justice. But now we're going to see that in the midst of not doing justice, they were still very dedicated to their religious practices. But their religious practice did not change the way they treated other people. And again, Amos is going to make that same point, that our outward religious practices are insufficient to please God. Our religious practices must be combined with personal transformation so that it will affect our relationship with others. That is that pure religion that James talks about. We must understand this dilemma is an age-old problem. We see examples of this in the New Testament. We also see it in our current situation where people profess and go to church and do all the things they're supposed to do, but they fail to look out for the welfare of others. We're going to see it in the New Testament and elsewhere. And I think one of the things that's happened during this period, that a lot of those cracks in our religious life have come evident in this difficult time in the pandemic. As COVID fatigue goes on, more and more we see where we have not developed the kind of religious stamina to continue to do the right thing, even though we're tired, we're worn down, we're frustrated. And Amos comes at a time when there's turmoil in the nation. We know that very soon there's going to be a series of assassinations. Forces from the outside are going to attack Israel. And so there's this turmoil, and the religious practice is being exposed. So I want to read you a couple of the passages from Amos that speak about it. We read this last week. They lie down beside every altar, on garments taken in pledge. In the house of their God, they drink wine taken in fines. This is significant because what they're doing is they're going to the altar, they're worshiping, they're doing all that, but at the same time, they're violating the very commandments they say of the God they say they're worshiping. For example, one of the commands is not to take a man's outer garment as pledge for a debt. Give it back to him before he goes to sleep so he doesn't have to be cold that night. And here they are sleeping on those very garments as they worship God. The hypocrisy there is very evident. They're not being just. And then in the passage I read to you a little while ago, when the new moon is, no, I'm sorry, this is chapter 8. When the new moon is over, or I'm sorry, when will the new moon be over, that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath be ended, that we may market wheat, skipping the measure, boosting the price, cheating with dishonest scales, buying the poor with silver, and the needy for a pair of sandals, selling even the sweepings as wheat. Here, they're celebrating the Sabbath as God commanded, but all the time they're thinking, okay, when's this going to be done so I can go back and make money? They're restless. They're ready to move on. But what's even more condemning is not only are they sitting there, but they're waiting to do immoral, unjust business. This is what Jesus said to the Jewish leaders. They have a form of godliness, but they deny the power of it. In other words, they look good on the outside, but it doesn't lead to the inner transformation. Jesus in Matthew 23 talks about them being like whited sepulchres. The outside looks really beautiful. They painted it and it's all good. But inside it's full of dead bones. The outward transformation isn't becoming eternal and then working its way out towards other people. So they're anxious and restless. They want to go and make money, and they want to do it in a way that's unjust. They're skimping on the measure. You know, I always think of this. I think of the potato chip bag. You get this big bag of potato chips, and there's about much. So each time they give you the same bag, but they give you less chips. They're using dishonest scales. Whenever they want to make it look like they're giving more, they put their finger on it. And finally, they're sweeping up all the little leftovers and filling the bag with it. The dust on the ground to fill up the bag to make it look like it's full. They're worshiping on Sabbath, and they're looking forward to cheating on the next day. Amos says also, go to Bethel and sin. Go to Gilgal and sin yet more. Bring your sacrifices every morning, your tithes every year. Burn leavened bread as a thank offering, and brag about your free will offerings. Boast about them, you Israelites, for this is what you love to do. See what they were doing? Is they were telling everybody, look at me, I am so religious. I love God so much. Remember, Jesus tells the story of the Pharisee and the tax collector. And the Pharisee stands there and says, thank God I'm not like this tax collector. And the tax collector goes, God, have mercy on my soul. And Jesus says, that man went back, not the one who was proud of himself. These people are proud of themselves. They think they've got their acts together because they're doing all the right religious things. But religious practice isn't enough. Our religion, that pure religion, is to reach out and care for the poor, the needy, the destitute. And then finally, listen to God's response that I read to you earlier. I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps. And why will he not do that? Because they're not letting justice roll like a river and righteousness like a never-failing stream. You see, their problem is they have an issue with piety. They think it's just the outward appearance. As I said, Jesus had this condemnation often for the people of his day. They would worship, but they would not be consistent in allowing that worship to transform them. So, how might I summarize what's going on here? First of all, they felt justified. Because they did the religious things, they felt justified. So they wouldn't listen to the truth. We will talk about this next week, how they had deaf ears and they wouldn't hear the truth. They were complacent. They were like the people in Matthew 25 who said, Lord, when did we miss you? When did we not give to you when you were poor? When did we not clothe you when you were naked? And Jesus said, when you did not do this for one of the least of these my brothers, you did not do it to me. You see, they were complacent because they thought their religious practice was enough. And another thing it says is they were doing more harm than good. Because in their injustice, in the ways they were acting, in their mistreatment of others, they were saying God was like one thing when he wasn't that way. The Apostle Paul, and we're going to do communion here in a little bit, but the Apostle Paul writes to the Corinthian church in this passage that we are so familiar with. It says, on the night the Lord was betrayed, he took bread and he broke it. But before that, he comes to them and he says, I am displeased with your religious practices. He says they come together. He says, I have no praise for you. You come together and there's division. And it says, when you come together, it's not the Lord's Supper you eat. For as you eat, each of you goes ahead without waiting for anybody else. One remains hungry, another gets drunk. In other words, what this was a feast. The rich would come and bring all their food, and the poor would sit there and watch them eat. And these men and women thought that they were right on bar. They're doing God's work. They're celebrating the Lord's Supper. And yet, in the meantime, there were people in their congregation who were hungry and not able to eat, but they were full. And Paul condemns them that their religious practice didn't reflect itself in their practice of justice and righteousness for others. So in the end, Paul is angry. God is angry. We know that Jesus was angry with those who were unwilling to make the practice match their behavior. Obviously, Amos is not saying we shouldn't do religious practices, but those religious practices should be part of a bigger thing, of caring for others, of doing the right thing for others, of being able to seek justice and righteousness and peace, to do what is right, to love the poor and the needy, those who are downtrodden, those who are oppressed. And I want to speak to the church, and not just us at Lacrosse, but I think overall the big church has had huge difficulties with matching this. We have often got off track because if we did the religious practice, when I was growing up, if we went to church 3 times a week, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday evening, if we were giving our tithe, if we came to Bible study and all that, we were doing what God demanded of us. And yet often we failed to love our neighbor and to care for those who are in need. What we need to learn to do is to see Jesus in the poor and the needy, in the naked, the starving, those in prison. We need to see the wounded man lying beside the road as Jesus talks about in the Good Samaritan, the parable. Now, that doesn't always mean doing everything they want us to do. Sometimes the supportive thing is to draw a boundary, to tell them they're wrong. Sometimes our church has got it wrong both ways. Sometimes we don't do enough to care for the needy, and sometimes we simply bend over backwards and never ask them to be responsible. There's a balance. But we can only love them when we engage with them, and we care for them, and we're there for them. So what should our practice look like? First of all, we should respect all forms of life and every human life. We should protect the rights of the unborn. We should keep the elderly safe. We should seek justice for all people, which will eliminate the causes of war and other things. We should be helping those who've been deeply wounded and hurting. We are called to respect the dignity of every human being because everyone, and I mean everyone, is created in the image of God. Every race, culture, tribe, sexual orientation, and peoples group are created in the image and are people for whom God died. We may not agree with every decision they make, but we are still to love them and respect them. We are called to care for the hurting, the physically disabled, the emotionally wounded, the behaviorally challenged. These are a lot of the kids I deal with. We are called to love these people, to provide for the needy, whether it's food, jobs, appropriate wages. And we are to, indeed, to speak lovingly the truth into the lives of people. Sometimes we need to say that your behaviors are leading to a bad place. These are all ways that our religious practice can then be translated into practices that transform people's lives. I know we've often got it wrong. We've gone to extremes either way, but we can get it right. But the one thing we can't do is sit back, go to church, and think that everything is all right. We must be willing to get involved, to transform people's lives, to touch them and to care for them. Because again, as James says, pure religion is to cure and care for the widows and the orphans. May we learn to do that. Our next song is a song that will prepare us for communion. Behold the Lamb.